The year was 2139, and Earth's skies were no longer silent. In the upper atmosphere, where the blue faded into black, a new shape hung like an omen, the USS Arlington, humanity's first orbital defense dreadnought. It was a monster of steel and intention, its lines brutish rather than graceful, designed not for exploration but for survival. It bore scars already, micrometeorite gouges and scorched plating from reactor tests, but it was the weapon slung across its midsection that drew all eyes. A railgun. Not just any railgun, but one longer than a city block, forged in orbital foundries from metals once hidden deep in the Earth's mantle. It was the first of its kind, the first of a new breed, a weapon designed not to impress but to terrify. In the shadow of the ship, Earth's surface seemed so small, fragile even. Yet tonight, it was not Earth that trembled. Across the stars, unseen eyes watched. The galactic compact, an ancient assembly of alien civilizations that had ruled the known sectors for millennia, had dispatched their envoys, their spies, their scouts. They had seen Earth's fumbling signals years ago, had dismissed humanity as a curious primitive world. But then came the orbital colonies. The antimatter harvesters. The sudden, alarming leap into technology that should have taken centuries. And now this. A cannon that bent physics itself into a weapon. Inside the Arlington's command deck, the air was thick with tension and recycled oxygen. Captain Michael Harrington, a man with square shoulders and gray at his temples, stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes fixed on the massive tactical display, where the railgun's firing path was drawn in crimson. "Status," he said, his voice calm but edged with iron. Lieutenant Sarah Coleman, barely 30 and sharp as the weapon she commanded, glanced up from her console. "Charging capacitors. Magnetic rails at 82%. Containment field is holding." Her voice wavered only slightly, betraying the weight of what they were about to attempt. In the corner, Chief Engineer Daniel Ross, oil still streaked on his hands despite the sterile environment, muttered, "We're about to fire something no human has ever fired before. God help us if it backfires." Harrington turned his head slowly. "God's not on the firing crew, Ross. You are." The engineer gave a humorless grin and returned to his readouts. Beyond the hull, satellites relayed every vibration, every current of the Arlington to the world below. Billions of people were watching. Entire cities had stopped. Families huddled around projection screens, workers abandoned their posts, children sat in stunned silence. Humanity had never been united in anticipation like this. And somewhere, beyond the veil of stars, the compact was watching too. For them, this was not a spectacle. It was a warning. The order came not from Earth's politicians but from fear. Months earlier, a scouting drone, sleek, alien, and unmistakably advanced, had slipped too close to the orbit of Mars. The Arlington had intercepted, but its conventional weapons had done nothing. The drone had retreated, but the message was clear: Earth was not alone, and those who watched did not come in peace. And so the railgun was born. Capacitors at full, Sarah's voice broke into Harrington's thoughts. "We are green across the board." "Targeting solution?" Harrington asked. "Locked. Test target, asteroid 4X991, distance 1.2 AU. Mass, 7 trillion tons. Impact point, calculated." It was a simple rock drifting through the void, mindless, harmless. But tonight it would be remembered as the first witness. The bridge fell into silence. Even the hum of the capacitors seemed to fade as the moment loomed. Harrington straightened, his hands tightening behind him. He could feel the weight of history pressing on his chest. "Fire," he said. The word cracked like thunder in the quiet room. Sarah's hand slammed the release. For an instant, nothing happened. Then light tore reality apart. The rail spat a pillar of white-blue energy, hurling a tungsten slug the size of a bus into the void. The entire ship shuddered, groaning like a beast unchained. Alarms flickered but held steady. Outside, the slug vanished into the black with a speed beyond comprehension. The Arlington's crew stared at their monitors. 1 second. 2. 3. A distant blip, an echo, a tremor across the void. The asteroid shivered on their displays. Then it shattered. 7 trillion tons of ancient rock disintegrated in silence, its pieces scattering like embers from a dying fire. A shockwave of dust rippled outward, caught in the cold embrace of space. The bridge erupted in gasps, exclamations, curses of awe. Ross gripped his console. Jesus Christ, we just erased a mountain. Sarah whispered, almost reverently, we just erased a world. But Captain Harrington said nothing. His gaze was locked not on the asteroid, not on the railgun's readouts, but on the stars beyond. Because in that silence, in that aftermath, something stirred. Sensors picked up faint distortions at the edge of the system. Gravity wells, unnatural. Space bending where nothing should exist. The compact had been waiting, listening, watching. And when the asteroid fell, so did their patience. Captain, Sarah said, her voice trembling now. Multiple contacts inbound. They're not human. The Arlington's bridge went still again, colder this time. Humanity had fired its first shot, and the galaxy had answered. Harrington exhaled slowly, a whisper only Ross and Sarah could hear. So it begins. Billions on Earth celebrated as the asteroid crumbled. They cheered, believing themselves invincible, believing the railgun to be the sword of gods. But above, in the cold dark, Harrington knew better. For the first time in history, humanity had spoken to the galaxy not with words, but with a weapon. And the galaxy would not stay silent. The asteroid's fragments still drifted in silence, glowing faintly in reflected sunlight, when the first shadows appeared on the Arlington's tactical screens. They were wrong in size, wrong in shape, wrong in their silence. Space itself seemed to fold where they arrived, light bending around invisible hulls. At first, they looked like ripples on water, distortions, mirages. But then the distortions thickened, sharpened, and ships began to emerge. Not one. Not 10. Dozens. Captain Michael Harrington stood motionless, eyes locked on the display as the enemy revealed themselves. They were vast, angular shapes, with no symmetry humans could comprehend. Some looked like shards of broken glass stitched together by light, others pulsed like living creatures wrapped in metal. Their size dwarfed the Arlington. Each one carried an aura of cold inevitability. The Galactic Compact had come. Contacts confirmed, Lieutenant Sarah Coleman said, her voice tight but steady. 43 signatures. Largest vessel massing at 8 kilometers. 8 kilometers. Harrington let the number sit in his mind like a weight. The Arlington was just under 1 kilometer, a newborn giant compared to Earth's past, but to these things? A child with a toy. Engineer Daniel Ross slammed a hand against his console. They saw the shot. They were waiting for it. Hell, they wanted us to pull the trigger. Sarah's knuckles whitened on her controls. Captain, they're not moving. They're just watching. Harrington studied the display. The enemy ship sat in silence, encircling the Arlington sector but not advancing. It was a net, tightening slowly, daring humanity to speak again. Broadcast? Harrington asked. Sarah nodded. They're transmitting something. Packet streams, encrypted, not on any band we know. Ross spat a curse. Of course they're talking. Question is, are they talking to us, or to each other about how to carve us apart? The bridge lights flickered, a reminder of the massive energy drain still reverberating from the railgun shot. Systems were stable, but the ship felt wounded, raw. The Arlington was powerful, but untested in war. And tonight, it stood alone. On Earth, celebration had turned to silence. Every major broadcast carried the Arlington's live feed. People in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, everywhere stared at the alien shapes now filling the tactical screens. The cheers that had thundered minutes earlier now fell into frightened murmurs. For generations, humanity had looked up at the stars and wondered if anyone was out there. Now the answer had come, and it loomed over them with weapons older than human civilization itself. Message from command, Sarah announced. Her voice cracked slightly this time, betraying the strain. Stand firm. Hold position. Do not fire unless fired upon. Ross scoffed. Classic. Sit here and wait for the gods to decide if we get crushed. Harrington finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate. We don't show fear. Not now. They came because we fired. If we break, if we fold, then that shot meant nothing. Sarah turned in her chair, eyes searching his face. And if standing firm gets us killed? Then we die standing, Harrington said simply. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. The aliens moved first. A beam of light lanced out from one of the smaller vessels, striking the drifting asteroid fragments. But it was not a weapon. The beam refracted, spread, then formed an image, an impossible projection visible across the void. The image was not of humans. It was of the asteroid. The projection replayed the railgun strike, frame by frame, slowed to a crawl. The slug leaving the Arlington. The asteroid's surface rupturing. The fragments scattering. The compact was showing humanity its own weapon, dissecting it, replaying it like a riddle. Sarah whispered, "They're analyzing us. Like we're an experiment." Ross leaned forward, squinting at the display. No. Not analyzing. Questioning. Like they don't understand how we did it. The bridge went still again. Harrington's mind raced. The compact had starships kilometers long, technology beyond anything Earth could dream of. Yet, they were stunned by the railgun. They don't have an answer, Harrington murmured. Sarah frowned. What do you mean, sir? They don't know how it worked. They don't know how a primitive species bent physics like this. That's why they haven't fired. That's why they're watching. Ross shook his head, disbelief etched into his features. We sling a piece of metal with magnets, and the galaxy's elite can't figure it out? That's impossible. Harrington's voice dropped lower. Or it's worse. Maybe it's not impossible. Maybe it's forbidden. The word hung in the air like a noose. The projection ended. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then one of the alien ships pulsed with sudden light. The Arlington sensors screamed with warning. They're powering weapons. Sarah shouted. Shields. Harrington barked. The Arlington groaned as its energy barriers surged to life, a shimmering cocoon against the void. Ross cursed, fingers dancing across controls, rerouting power. The alien strike came. A beam, thin as a needle, lanced across space and struck the Arlington's shields. It did not explode. It did not burn. Instead, it sliced. Metal peeled away like flesh under a scalpel. Deck plating screamed. Warning klaxons howled. Ross shouted, direct hit. Portside hull compromised, decks 5 through 7 venting atmosphere. Seal them. Harrington snapped. Sarah gritted her teeth. Shields holding, barely. One more like that and we're gone. Harrington's jaw tightened. He looked at the railgun controls, the weapon that had brought them to this moment. Still charged, still hungry. They wanted to see it once, he said. His voice was a whisper now, but sharp as steel. Let's show them again. Sarah hesitated, her hand hovering over the firing controls. Target, sir? Harrington's eyes locked on the largest alien vessel, the 8-kilometer behemoth at the fleet's center. The heart of the beast, he said. Ross's face went pale. Sir, if that misses. It won't. The bridge trembled as the capacitors screamed to life again. Lights flickered. Consoles sparked. The Arlington groaned under the strain. Sarah's hands shook, but her voice did not. Rails at 100%. Harrington raised his chin, his eyes fixed on the impossible leviathan before them. Fire! The Arlington roared, its railgun unleashing a second slug into the void. The recoil thundered through the ship, and for an instant, the universe seemed to hold its breath. On Earth, billions leaned forward, hearts in their throats. In orbit, the alien fleet shifted, their formations rippling in sudden agitation. And across the bridge of the Arlington, Harrington whispered to himself words only he could hear. This time, let them answer. The slug tore through the void like a god's hammer. It left the Arlington in silence, no fire, no smoke, only the faint ripple of distorted light from the rails as the tungsten rod vanished into darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but the anticipation of impact. Then the behemoth stirred. The alien flagship shifted its angle, a ripple coursing down its jagged, crystalline hull. Shields, if they were shields, flared around it, luminous arcs of violet energy dancing like storms trapped in glass. The compact was ready. They had stared into the heart of humanity's first railgun shot, dissected it, replayed it. This time, they thought they understood. But understanding and surviving were not the same. The slug struck. It did not explode. It did not burn. It simply went through. The flagship's defenses shimmered, warped, and then failed as the slug punched a hole straight through 8 kilometers of alien engineering. The exit wound blossomed in a silent, radiant detonation, fragments of alien alloy scattering like shattered stars. The ship convulsed, lights flickering across its impossible surfaces, before it began to break apart. On the Arlington's bridge, the crew froze. Ross was the first to speak, his voice hoarse. "Dear God, we killed it." Sarah's eyes were wide, disbelief etched across her face. One shot brought it down. Harrington said nothing. He didn't look at the wreckage. He looked at the rest of the fleet. Because they weren't moving. Not retreating. Not attacking. Just watching. 42 ships remained, a noose of titans around a single human vessel. They had seen one of their greatest brought down in a single strike, and the silence that followed was more terrifying than any retaliation. Sarah's voice shook now. "Captain, what are they waiting for?" Harrington's jaw clenched. "They're deciding." On Earth, silence had overtaken billions. The second shot was replaying across every broadcast, over and over. The moment of impact. The impossible collapse of something that had dwarfed humanity's might. Children cried. Soldiers stared in disbelief. Politicians whispered prayers they had long forgotten. Humanity had won a victory, yes, but it felt less like triumph and more like blasphemy. Because the question hung unspoken in every mind. If humanity could kill one of them, what would they now do in return? The alien fleet stirred. Not with weapons. With sound. Or rather, with something beyond sound. The Arlington sensors lit with frequencies that weren't frequencies, signals that weren't signals. The bridge crew clutched at their heads, pain searing behind their eyes as the alien broadcast poured through every channel, every wavelength, every spectrum. Ross groaned. "It's in my damn skull." Sarah's voice cracked. "They're not talking, they're showing." And then the crew saw it. Not with eyes, but with minds. Images flooded them, visions of ancient wars fought in silence across galaxies. Weapons far beyond comprehension, energies that burned stars to ash. And through it all, one rule carved into the marrow of civilization: no kinetic weapons. No railguns. No slugs. No crude, physical projectiles. Because long ago, someone had built them. Long ago, someone had wielded them and the galaxy had nearly ended. The compact's message was clear, seared into human thought with undeniable force. You were never supposed to make this weapon. Sarah's face went pale. Her breath came ragged. They banned it. They erased it. They don't even understand how we rediscovered it. Ross staggered against the console, fury and terror mixing in his eyes. So what are we, huh? A mistake? An accident that spat in their ancient rules? Harrington stood firm, though his knuckles whitened behind his back. The visions faded, the agony receded, but the silence returned. 42 alien ships hovered like executioners, waiting. Sarah whispered, "If they erase us now, no one will ever know why." Harrington turned slowly, his gaze sweeping the bridge crew. Their fear was raw, their disbelief crushing. And yet, behind their terror burned something else. A fire he had seen in human eyes since the first colony ships left Earth's cradle. Defiance. They wanted an answer, Harrington said at last, his voice low, steady. They fired their questions into our skulls. But the truth is simple. He turned toward the tactical display, the railgun's third slug waiting in its cradle. The answer is that humanity doesn't kneel. Ross stared at him. Sir, if we fire again, they'll wipe us out. Harrington looked him in the eye. Maybe. But if we don't, we die as insects. If we do, we die as men. Sarah's hand hovered over the controls. She was trembling, her breath shallow. But in her eyes, the fire grew too. Rails charged, she said. The crew braced. No one spoke. No one prayed. They simply stood. Target, Harrington commanded. Sarah swallowed. Which one, sir? Harrington looked at the fleet, the gathered armada of civilizations older than Earth itself. Then he shook his head. All of them. Sarah's fingers slammed down. The Arlington screamed with power. The slug roared into space, and then another, the cannon hurling steel and tungsten into the void faster than light could dream of. The ship shook apart under the strain, alarms shrieking, decks fracturing, but it didn't matter. Humanity's defiance filled the stars in a storm of fire and velocity. The aliens did not fire back. Not one. They watched. One slug tore through a frigate, reducing it to shards. Another ripped the arm off a warship shaped like a blade. A third missed, vanishing into eternity. Still, the aliens did not retaliate. One by one, their ships folded back into distortions, vanishing as if space itself swallowed them. The noose loosened. The armada was gone. Only wreckage and silence remained. On Earth, the world erupted. Not in cheers. Not in celebration. But in stunned silence, as if a species was holding its breath together. The Arlington floated wounded, venting atmosphere, half its decks crippled. But it lived. Its crew lived. Humanity lived. Sarah slumped in her chair, trembling. They left. Ross shook his head, disbelief on his face. No. They didn't leave. They ran. Harrington turned toward the viewport, where stars gleamed indifferent to war. His face was unreadable, but his voice was clear. They didn't find their answer. The bridge crew stared at him. He continued, softer now. They don't understand how we built it. They don't understand why we use it. They only know fear, rules, silence. But us? He closed his eyes, exhaling slow. We break silence. We ask questions no one wants asked. And when the galaxy tells us no. He opened his eyes, and they burned with fire. We fire again. And so it was written. Humanity, the children of Earth, the fragile, the reckless, had fired its first railgun, and in doing so, reminded the stars of something they had long forgotten. A truth no compact could erase. When humanity demanded an answer, the galaxy had none to give.